It had been a long day, and I was really tired. The only thing at that moment standing between me and a chance for some much-needed unwinding time was a messy table. Over the course of about 10 minutes, having just finished dinner and about to start encouraging my kids to help clear the table with me, I went from a calm, stable parent to a, shall we say, less calm and less stable parent. You might not be able to relate to that, unless, of course, you have kids, in which case you probably could relate to that. And at the end of that 10-minute journey, which I'll finish sharing with you in a moment, I got a surprise that I think is a gift worth sharing. Welcome to IDD Leader, where human services leaders grow their impact, lead with heart, and build the workplaces our field deserves. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Today on the podcast is a different kind of day. It's a holiday edition. It's a short heart-to-heart from me to you. This is much less scripted or planned out than usual for solo episodes, and we'll have some guests coming on again very soon. I can't wait to kick off the new year with some interviews that have already been completed. But today you've got just me. And I wanted to share this gift with you because it's been really impactful in my life. And this episode will probably be a little more raw and maybe a little bit less polished than some other ones. But at this time of the year, I think what we really need is some connection. And hopefully you'll get that out of this episode, along with encouragement and maybe even some insights. We had just finished eating dinner together as a family, and it was my responsibility to help the kids clear the table so that we could go on with our evening activities and I could get to that unwinding time that I was really looking forward to. I started asking my older kids to clear the table, put things in the sink. My younger kids, I started trying to corral them. It was not going well. No, stop trying to trap your younger brother under the laundry basket. Stop reading the nutrition label on the ketchup. It's a ketchup bottle. Just pick it up and stick it in the fridge. And as the minutes passed by and the table very slowly was getting cleared, I was getting increasingly frustrated. Now, I didn't have an all-out meltdown, thankfully, but I was not keeping my cool. And somewhere in there, probably about 10 minutes in, as this job had been dragging out way longer than it needed to, my 10-year-old son chimes up, and I was surprised to hear this from him because it had insight that I lacked in that moment. He said, "Hey, Dad, do you think you could be more, I don't know, calm?" Now listen, that might not sound like much, but when your 10-year-old is doing therapy for you, you know you've crossed a line somewhere. What that moment was for me, it was a gift. It was the gift of perspective. Now, what happens a lot of time, it happens as parents, but it happens as leaders, is that it's so easy. We get so consumed with doing the stuff or taking care of what needs to get taken care of. And I don't know if you're anything like me, but sometimes you see a hole and you're like, hey, I'm just going to fill it. Or you see a need, bam, I'm going to meet that need. And there's a lot of giving that for many leaders just sort of naturally flows out of who they are. That's part of how they got to where they are. And it's probably part of how you got to where you are. And when we do that, sometimes we're just kind of in the trenches and we're giving, we're pouring out of ourselves, and we're there trying to solve problem after problem. Some days it feels like that's all we are doing is just trying to solve this problem and then bounce from that problem over to the next one. And a lot of times that looks like meetings and touch points and all kinds of different things like this. But what can happen is if we don't, there's two layers to this. If we don't pay attention to how we're doing, like what's going on with us, it's easy on layer one for us to react instead of respond. Now, for if you're into a behavioral background, when I say react versus respond, all behavior is a form of responding. But I'm really trying to communicate the difference between just taking action versus thoughtful, intentional, calculated action, or the difference between raising my tone of voice, getting flustered and frustrated with my messy table moment, versus why don't I just try to channel that energy that's happening around me towards the cleaning and make it fun and enjoyable for everybody involved? That's level one. Level two is that this also happens at the systemic or the organizational level, where a problem that's not just how I personally, leader, am responding, although, yes, that matters a lot. That's level one. But level two would be how the organization handles problems or is responding to problems. And the gift of perspective, for me, it goes something like this. When I get too focused on just the problem as I see it, if I stop paying attention to myself, and this could be, I mean, this is almost embarrassing to say, but even at a physiological level, like if I'm starting to get tense or frustrated or my neck is tightening or however it shows up for you in your body when you're starting to get a little bit elevated or maybe not even fully escalated, but just you're feeling stress in your body, it's very easy to get reactionary and where I'm not even realizing how much my tone or my type of response is contributing to the problem or is not, it's adding a layer of complexity that wasn't needed. So if I respond short on an email when a little softer touch would have been good because I'm tired of dealing with that problem situation, then I've actually just moved the problem backwards. I've made it harder for everybody involved. And especially as a leader, these things carry extra weight in many relationships when there's people, reporting to me or reporting to you. And so I want to give you that gift of saying it's okay to take a breath, to slow down for a moment, and to do whatever tools you have to respond instead of react. One of the tools that I found most personal, and this is just on this kind of feels like a little vulnerable to be sharing this, but one of the things I found to be most helpful is if I actually just sort of name what I'm experiencing. And it could be like, oh, I'm feeling really stressed right now. I'm feeling really tight right now. Or I just, I really did not want to hear how that person dropped the ball again or whatever it is. Start to name it. But then even that last one was probably not the best example. The more I can name it where I'm talking about what's going on like in my body or what's going on in my thoughts, the more that can start to actually help me see this is how my presence or how I'm entering the situation, how that might be impacting it. And along those lines, I've been learning and continuing to learn. It's been a long journey over many years. But one of the big differences between when I personally react versus when I personally respond intentionally and do it well, yes, it's naming or being aware of what I'm feeling, what's going on with me. And the other big piece is that I start to, how can I put this into simple words? It's almost as if I start talking to myself. Now, it's possible I'm crazy, but what I mean is I start to be very intentional with the messages I'm giving. I would put it this way. I reframe things to myself. A lot of times when I'm starting to react, what's happening is that I'm perceiving the problems as threats. If I can reframe that and say, these are not threats, these are challenges. For me, as simple as that sounds, that changes everything. Because instead of moving into some kind of protect mode or safety mode, which could trigger all kinds of defense mechanisms, then I go into, oh, this is a challenge. And it starts to trigger more creative problem solving. I start to get curious about it. I start to ask questions. And that's a good sign. I've learned that's a good sign for me that I'm on the right track to coming up with meaningful solutions. Now, for you, this may be old hat. So if so, that's great. I'm glad that you're operating with all that. But from what I've seen, leaders, I mean, we know this. Leaders are people too, and we're just as susceptible to reacting rather than responding. And especially when there's so much on our plates, it's easy for that to happen. So I wanted to give you that gift of perspective and sharing that. But let me just go for another moment and share about the second level, which is the organizational level. The healthiest and strongest organizations that I work with or that I've seen or been part of, they are intentional about their problem-solving processes. Most often, what I've seen, witnessed, experienced is that problem comes, we don't talk about how we solve the problem, we just do the problem-solving stuff we do. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose there's a specific group home or a specific program that's had 3 reportable incidents in the past 30 days. So the normal process that we might go through of how we're going to problem solve this is, okay, there's a staff member that needs to get corrected, or maybe they need to get let go because they're the problem, or maybe there's a need that's being unmet, not being addressed properly, so we're going to address that need. And then 3 months later, there's another group home or another program where they also have multiple reportable incidents in a short period of time. We jump in, we address and we look at what needs to get fixed, and we just solve it. Okay, none of that is bad. That's a good thing. But what I'm inviting you to, and what I'm the gift of perspective is to say, yes, we need to jump in and solve whatever we need to solve, and there are certainly actions that need to get taken. But what about taking a moment to assess our organization's problem solving? How are we going about that? Is that all falling on, let's suppose I'm the executive director. Is that all falling, everything just comes right back to me? So my plate gets really full too fast? Or everything kind of bottlenecks with some person, maybe it's HR director or someone within the organization? How's the communication channels happening around problems? Not just incidents. I know I use that as an example, but really this applies to all kinds of things. I mean, I've heard it said this way: you can measure the health of an organization simply by the time gap between problem identified and problem solved. So if you're in a restaurant, you start serving your Italian restaurant, your new breadsticks are kind of awful. How long does it take for that to get back to the owner of the restaurant or corporate, if it's a chain, to say, we need to stop serving those breadsticks. We need to go back to the old recipe. The old one's better. In organizations, this can play out in a lot of different ways. And a lot of times when we are so focused on doing the stuff and solving the problems, we actually never look at our problem solving. And so just like the example of me with the messy table as a parent, where I'm not thinking about the process in which I'm trying to coach them through clearing the table. I'm not even thinking about how I'm reacting. I'm just trying to get it done. It's kind of the same thing with the whole organization or parts of the organization. We want to look at how are we handling different types of problems so that we're not just reacting to them as threats, but we're seeing these as challenges to overcome. And can we improve our process? Can we improve the way that we go about solving our problems? Because what happens very frequently is the way that we solve problems as an organization often can contribute to the problem or can perpetuate the root system or the environment that created the problem in the first place. In other words, with the example I gave on the reportable incidents, what is going on that's allowing these to keep happening at multiple group homes or within multiple programs? And starting to assess what are the factors that put that into place or that make that more likely to happen? How can we start to address those? Looking at it can be a host of different factors here. Today's not so much about tactics, but more about kind of this one key insight. How do we as an organization respond and not just react? Now, you can probably see, at least guess where I'm headed with this for a moment, which is when it comes to workforce issues. That's the focus of IDD Leader, the podcast, the organization. What we do is we help you help solve workforce issues and help supervisors become awesome and make teams people never want to leave. But in that whole space of workforce related issues, it's really easy to not see the water we're swimming in or to just accept as reality. High turnover is it's just a thing that's part of this, being a human services provider, or not expecting more or investing more into our staff, or saying we're doing everything we can do. And believe me, from conversations I'm having, there's a good chance you really are going so far above and beyond anything above the minimum of what would be expected. But that gift, that leadership surprise is the, hey, leader, uh, you think you could maybe be more intentional, more calm, more fun, more innovative? Not because you're losing, but because that's what winning looks like. And at the end of the day, yes, we're so often measured by our outcomes, but we don't really control outcomes. We control what we put into the situation, either us personally as leaders or what we as an organization put into the situation. There's an element of trust and of letting go, of saying, listen, you can do everything right, and there still can be a set of circumstances where certain outcomes are just they're not what they should be, or they're not ideal. But when you play the game right, when you do your part right, that's what you can control. That's what we can control. And at the end of the day, that's the gift of perspective, is how am I contributing to this? What's going on in my body as a leader? What's going on in my organization as a leader? And being curious, paying attention, and then saying, now that I'm seeing this stuff, I bet we could do this a little bit differently, or this other aspect a little bit differently. It's so freeing. It helps relieve stress so much. And just as I'm on that journey to keep learning how to respond instead of reacting, I wanted to invite you into that journey and give you the gift of some perspective, particularly this holiday season when things are extra hectic and crazy. Now listen, at the end of every episode, I try to give you some kind of action move that you can take, something to put this into practice. For today, my biggest suggestion would be just pay attention. Pay attention to, I think it starts with us as people, but pay attention the next time you're in a meeting when somebody says something that frustrates you, or the next time you hear news of someone that's really not doing what they should be doing. What's going on in your body? What's going through your mind? Is this a threat or is this a challenge? And then respond accordingly, and don't just react. And listen, I've put together a free resource to help you quickly identify some ways that your frontline supervisors might accidentally be contributing to turnover. At the strongest organizations, their frontline supervisors are actually retention ambassadors for the whole rest of the org. But at most organizations, I see frontline supervisors unintentionally contribute to turnover in a number of different ways. And this quick assessment will help you readily identify if that's happening at your organization, and then give some specific direction as to what to do about it. You can get this resource as a free download at iddleader.com/burnout. And I hope you find it to be very helpful. Lastly, if this episode was in any way adding value to you, would you consider sharing it with a friend or a colleague? Maybe someone else that, they're a little prone to reacting rather than responding? Okay, no, you don't have to preface it that way at all. But this gift of perspective is a leadership gift that can be for all of us. And so I'm sure they'd really appreciate hearing from you and hearing about something that has made a positive impact for you personally. Well, until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.